Good evening, everyone. This is Yehuda Shamroth from the Miriam Project Geula Hour from Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel, introducing Rabbi Pinchas Winston on a weekly basis out of the kindness of his heart and his brilliant Torah he brings to us on a weekly basis also, whenever possible. We want to ask you to share this with your friends and also know that Josh Wander, who is our co-sponsor, is always very actively involved, but he's doing other projects right now, like getting people to make Aliyah if he can. And you can check his website at israeltorah.org, also called bringthemhome.org. And Rabbi Winston, of course, has a plethora of books and videos and teachings on every topic you can imagine, especially Geula related, which I'm sure you're very interested in. And 36.org is where you want to go for that. Waiting for redemption. Inc. It looks like also. So Rabbi's going to continue his discussion on the 10 most asked questions about what to expect with the Geula Shalema. Thank you very much for joining us, Rabbi.
Thank you. The Waiting for Redemption.inc is actually just a phony name. They just made up that appropriate for the situation. In any case, we were left off basically talking about what to expect, what things will look like at the end of days, how things are going to unfold. Part of the problem we have is that most of us don't understand what actually history is about, what we're actually working towards. There's a history from the average point of view, from most people in the world, billions of people, of course, in history have looked at history the same way, and that is that God created man back at the beginning, put him in the Garden of Eden, gave him a choice. Man made the wrong choice, of course, and even though he was told and was warned and everything, like don't do it because if you do, you're going to die. I mean, it was pretty explicit. Which words weren't comprehensible, that he made that mistake, but he did anyhow. And because of that, we got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, sent someplace else, the world beyond the Garden of Eden, which is the world we're living in right now, and certainly there's no paradise, so people try to replicate that in different ways, in different levels, but obviously we can't get back there until we actually get back there because it's something altogether different, whole different spiritual reality. You can't get in there unless you are spiritual enough. So tzaddik can go there. There are people who, historically, after they die, go there, and even in this world, it's actually all around us because it's just a different spiritual plane. It doesn't have to go someplace else. It's more everything. Life clearly is a function of consciousness. That's what it's all about. It's consciousness, what you know. And it's very fascinating. I mean, you just look and you read, documentaries, or you watch documentaries, you read books on the brain and how the brain works. We become more sophisticated as time goes on to understand the brain. And as we do, we begin to realize, in a sense, how flimsy perception really is and how it's built upon assumptions and how we see people who live, delusional realities. They're living, and the most amazing thing is we're all walking. There's people who go too far and become dangerous to themselves and the world around them, and they get put away someplace to be taken care of, taken out of society so that they won't cause damage. But it's amazing how many people are walking around the streets who seem to be relatively normal until you realize that they're not, and that includes all of us. There's very few people who actually are as normal as they might appear on the outside. People, we accept that. I mean, psychology talks about it. We know we read books about it. Everyone's got hang-ups. Everybody's got shortcomings. Everybody's got things that they're afraid of, things that they're not afraid of. It's just a question of which and what your life is about. But all together, when it's all said and done, it's all about perception. It's all about how you look at the world. It's not that the Attorney General gets up every single day. I mean, there have been people in history maybe who have done things like that, but very few who do that. They'll get up and start the day by saying, I'm an evil person, and I can't wait to see what kind of evil I can do today. When they go to war, I mean, the trouble is that you can have people disagreeing about what is right and what is wrong, and they both mean to do the right thing, but it can result in World War III in the end because of it. And they're just simply people who are very selfish and dictators. You know why democracy doesn't work? You know why it can't work until Mashiach comes and then we won't even need it anymore? Is because even if you have 10 people and 9 of them are good, the 10th one is going to be corrupt. I'm just throwing out a number, perception, just a percentage right now, but there's so many people in the world who are going to take advantage of people's niceness. They're going to take advantage of people's naivety because that's what they do. That's who they are. Maybe they had a terrible childhood, but it's the way God made the world. He arranged that terrible child. He created that monster, so to speak, for the sake of free will, for the sake of a better world. There's nothing happening today that's accidental. Everything is part of some kind of master plan. Hard to conceive. I just actually had to write about this today, and I'm always looking for an analogy to make the point, because analogies, Shlomo Malach was the master of a mashalim, and the Gemara, talks about mashalim as being like literally handles for the Torah. If you have a good mashal, you can understand a concept. So it's like living next door to somebody for decades, and you talk to them, you play golf with them, you schmooze with them, and spend time with them, and families and all that. Now all of a sudden one day you see their picture in the paper, and underneath it is a story about what they did. And no, can't be. There must be a mistake. Can't be. Look at this. That's the name. That's the address, right? But they must have got it wrong, because I know this person for the longest time. But then you read more details, and as you go through more details, it gets you start to realize, well, yeah, but that's I didn't understand that, and didn't know he was involved in that, and something like that. By the end of the article, you're going, wow, you think you know somebody, and you really don't. And it's after all, he was fooling me all this time. I thought that he was honest. I thought he was this, and now I see what he's done: is corruption, embezzlement, the whole thing, and I'm completely shocked. And you start to distance yourself, and try to figure it out. And he goes to jail. You never think about maybe visiting him. On the contrary, you're so disgusted by what he's been accused of, and then you find out they made a mistake. Somebody framed him. Somebody did something to make it look like he was the guilty party. He was not the guilty party, and he gets off the hook. And wow, it's amazing how you thought for a short period of time it could be true. You believed the evidence. You believed the newspapers. You believed what you're told. You believed it. And not just that, but once you heard that, you started looking back into the past to see, well, that would explain that, and I had a question about that. And you start reinterpreting the relationship, the time you spent together in terms of things you're now hearing. And all of a sudden, it turns out the person is as innocent, is as good a person as you thought, and they were wronged by some over ambitious attorney general who wanted to make a name for himself. I know this actually happened to somebody, who just went after him because he wanted to climb the ladder and be a political success. And in the end, the person got off. It was proven that he was innocent, but that's after hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees he could not get back because this guy wanted to climb the political ladder. This goes on all the time. People do this all the time, and they justify, they rationalize, and make it look like they're being tzaddikim and kanoim, zealous. But the reality is they're being selfish. And that's what happened. And now you find it differently, and so you start to feel, oh, that's terrible. You can't even. He comes home, you can't even face him. Right? You pretend, like you didn't do anything wrong. So nice. I knew you were innocent the entire time. It's so good to see you. Must be so happy to be home. I'm so sad and so sorry for what you went through and all that. Must have been terrible. And inside, you're feeling terribly guilty because you were one of those people who happened to doubt him after a while as well. And this mashal, the nimshal of this mashal is God, obviously, right? God's doing things constantly. It's how can he be behind Hamas? How can he be behind the left and the liberals and all that? Last night I was coming home off the highway and it was backed up all the way onto the highway, almost to the exit ramp. I didn't know what the reason was. I thought maybe, God forbid, there was an accident. I didn't know there was a protest going on close to where I live. And they were deliberately blocking, causing a backup, a trap, endangering people. I had a rented car. Right, and this car, for some reason, the first time I ever saw it happen, I had this car several times already, and the car, all of a sudden, because it's going stop and start and stop and start and stop and start and stop and start, all of a sudden there's a message on my screen that says that the gearbox is heated up, and I have to safely pull over to the side. Please don't blow up. Please don't blow up. Please don't blow up. It's like, not now, not here. All these cars are lined up, and they're going back and forth across the crosswalk and all that. And this is going on the entire time. And of course, by the time I get to I had to pull over. I had to wait a couple of minutes for the car to cool down. It's actually quite cool, like, no pun intended, the way how the car recognized this and took care of it and told me one more minute, and then it was done, and then we got to go, right? But I had returned the car, and it was late, and I had a Mariv, and I was uptight by this point in time. And as I got to the intersection, I was angry. So I honked the person so I could go run across and get out of there today. I was frustrated. Everybody else too. It was nonstop honking, nonstop. Everybody going across was doing the same thing as well, and because we're talking about 100 some odd cars, inch by inch, at a time of night that it should be happening. And then you think to yourself later on, but God's doing this. They might be rebelling against God, and God will have to talk to them and deal with them and all that, but who knows what the cheshbon between them and God actually is, because or who knows, but it's not outside the box. It's not outside God's master plan for creation. Not them, not the leaders who run them. Are there evil people in history? Is there free will? Yeah, there's free will, and there's evil people in history as well. But again, this is something that God has to determine. But the point is, all of it, it's a package deal. It's all part of the same thing. Whether it's coronavirus, whether it's a Chinese threat, whether it's an Iranian threat, whether it's a Russian threat, whether it's an American threat, or whether it's this, whether it's that, every single last detail. It's hard to comprehend. We can't fathom. People have said this to me, and I'm sure they said to you or other people as well. When they hear about the Holocaust, they hear about what's going on, or they hear about the situation. I can't believe in a God that can allow this to happen. They don't even know that God's doing it, right? They just think he's allowing it. The bad guys are doing it. That's what they're assuming, and that God's not stopping it. So they're the only. But if they found out that God's actually responsible, he's making it happen this way, right? Now, where's the free will come in? Not a problem. It's always comes up in these discussions. You can't help it, right? You can't help it to have a discussion about free will. We're talking about God, and predetermination and things like that. But the reality, there's different ways, there's different approaches, and I'm not going to go into right now because it's a separate discussion. But just one shorthand approach, and that is one of the reasons why it works is because God knows the future. If God did know the future, if he had to create the future like we do, okay, then you'd have a problem with free will. For example, I cannot dictate to my grandchild that what his future is going to be like, but I can try to influence it. So I can play a little trick on him. He's too young, too naive to know about how he thinks and what attracts his attention. But I've seen certain things that catches his eye. And if I say to him, choose the candy, I know I got his attention right away. And I put it in the hand, and I always see him reach. He's right-handed, so he reaches for his right hand. So where do you go to? You should go to the one that's the closest, right? You might, a little bit older, be a little bit smarter, and then go for the opposite one. But in the meantime, the simple, 4 or 5-year-old, so I can influence it by putting my hand a little bit closer to his hand. Doesn't say it works all the time, but I'm saying that's a possibility. So I have to create the future because I don't control it. I don't know it. So I try to influence it instead. But if I knew it, if I knew what was going to happen, then I can maybe manipulate things today, because I know that this person in the future is going to be somebody who's going to choose to do X, Y, and Z, and therefore I can now arrange it that he's in a place to do X, Y, and Z, because that's what his choice would have been anyhow. So he has free will to choose to do X, Y, and Z, or just X, or just Y, or just Z, right? He can do that, but then God, knowing the future, he knows that's what his choice would have been or will be, so therefore he puts it in position to be that person to do that thing. So it's not a problem with free will. It gets complicated. It's not a simple issue. And I mentioned before, just because we don't understand it doesn't mean it's something that we should be able to understand. God is God. He's infinite. I mean, what we know about reality and creation is very limited compared to what he's able to do. And that, we just know what he tells us, what he allows us to know, and what he arranges for us to know. But the bottom line is that every last detail is being like he's a conductor, right? Of not just an 80-piece orchestra, which is amazing in itself. I never understood how that works. How somebody can be up there. I mean, it looks like they're all played by themselves and they're following sheet music and all that. And he's just sort of like overlooking the whole thing. So I don't know. Never really checked into it. Actually, I did check into it, but I forget what I saw. But the point is that God does. He's overseeing everything and encouraging and moving everybody the way they have to go to do whatever has to be done, and it's all on target, every last detail. So someone says, I can't believe in a God who's responsible for things like that. I can't believe in a God who allows such evil to exist. I can't believe in a God who, it makes a world like that. I can believe in a God maybe, and this is what people said. This is what they told me, right? This is what the book, Why Did Bad Things Happen to Good People? He believes in a God made the world, but not a one that runs the world. Not because he can't, because he doesn't want to. He gave it over to man, and then said, whatever you do, you do. So therefore, if people do evil, they do evil. So bad things can happen to good people. That was his solution. He couldn't believe in a God who could be responsible for bad to what he saw as good people, primarily his son. And that's a problem. But you expand that approach, right? You're learning, Zohar, which is Idra Rabba, Idra Zuta. You're learning Sifrit Snusa. It's amazing. You read these holy, very sophisticated works that there's no way in the world any human being could ever have come up with on their own, ever, at all. It has to have come from God. There's no other explanation if you know what it is. You've seen it. But it doesn't mention any of this. It doesn't bring it down to earth. It stops short, way up here, right? So high up that while you're learning it, it's like you forget about the world. While you're involved with it, you just forget about what's going on all around you, because it doesn't make any mention of that or say that's the reason why that type of thing happens. Except once in a while, maybe. Usually, the commentators that come along after, like the Vilna Gaon, and after that the Leshem and the Rashash and other great commentaries on the Zohar, will explain it. Then they might bridge the gap between that world and the one down below. And oh wow, and that's very insightful. But after a while, if you learn enough of it, you can do the same thing as well. You should have to see the connection. Well, that must be the reason for this. But it's like the same thing. It's if a little virus goes into the body, you can't even see it. It's microscopic. And it goes in somehow, maybe by touching something, maybe by eating something, maybe even by smelling something, maybe even through the ear. I don't know. It goes in, right? And somehow it gets into the blood system and sets up shop and starts to mass produce itself, and eventually turns out to be some type of sore on the skin, and you can't begin to imagine how that could be a virus. It's a cut, it's a sore, but it's infected, right? So the doctor by now, science, medicine, has made the connection. So we know, and therefore we prescribe an antibiotic or something that's going to help the person to get rid of the virus, and it works. You take something for gout, right? A pill like that, and within minutes the pain goes away. The pain's excruciating. You can't understand why it's there, but it's gout. And you take a pill because they've analyzed it. They know the reason for it. And that's the way the world works. It's always working the same way. All the things that we see on the surface, if you only look at the surface, you can't possibly imagine what the things behind the surface, underneath the surface, below the surface, how they could be the root causes of all these things. But, it is. And if you make the connection, you trace it all back, then you can find out what's really actually going on. So, for example, I made this point before, and I somewhere in all this, there's answers to questions, okay? And for example, the 10 martyrs. The 10 martyrs, Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Meir, a lot of great people dying, but not just them. It's just not just the 10 martyrs, but there were who knows, hundreds of thousands, millions. Who the Gemara describes it in Gittin. How many were killed mercilessly by the Romans in terrible ways, and the blood? I can't even fathom what the Gemara is talking about. It was so bad. And they even, in a sense, the Holocaust doesn't even sound like what was like back then. But the Holocaust is more methodical. It hid a lot of it. They couldn't hide it back in Roman times so much. It was much more gory in a lot of respects. But just same thing. And why? How? So people, they couldn't answer the question. You know why? Because no one teaches the answer. It's like tefillah, right? Tefillah is prayer, right? We're told to pray. We have a mitzvah to pray. There's a deraisa, there's a Torah mitzvah to pray, not the Shmonaris and all that. The rabbis came along and they set it up, but the Rambam brings down that we have an obligation once a day to praise God and to ask for something, to thank Him. These three things. And you can actually, technically speaking, fulfill the mitzvah prayer on a Torah level by doing a very, very short davening, which a lot of people would like to be able to do. And some even tried to do it, right? But the reality is today we have a prayer service, and it's not, even though the rabbis structured it, you have to understand that the rabbis who structured it were prophets. And they were Anshe Knesset Gadol. These are people who were in touch with God. So even though the Torah didn't mandate all these different sections, they knew what to do because God was telling them through prophecy how it should look, what it should look like. But more than that, they understood that prophecy was a means to an end. Prayer was a means to an end. It was doing something. It wasn't just, hi God, how you doing? Right? Remember me? I remember you, right? Let's talk more often. I'm going to work now. See you later. That wasn't what they knew. That prayer wasn't that. The Nefesh HaChaim, based upon the Zohar, talks about their feeding times in the universe, the spiritual universe, right? When the spheres need light from us. But the bottom line to all of this is that back at the beginning, when God made the world, before man existed, even before the first day of creation was built upon this reality, and what was it? Something called sparks, holy sparks, individual packaged, packages of divine light. God's light is infinite, it's uniform, it's perfect, it's beyond description, but somehow, for our sake, miraculously, God was able to take His light, or some aspect of it, and make it into little things called, the Tzotzi Kedusha, holy sparks. And that's such a Kabbalistic idea. And everything we do comes down to it. There's nothing else. If I only said 2 words tonight, the Tzotzi Kedusha, it would be enough. Why? Because that's all life is about. The Tzotzi Kedusha, holy sparks. That's the whole thing. What I'm doing right now is supposedly, hopefully, elevating sparks, rectifying the world. What you're doing right now, watching, listening, processing information, doing the same thing. If you get up and do a mitzvah, you're doing the same thing. Tefillah, that's what it's about. The whole point of mitzvahs and tefillah, learning Torah, it's all part of the same idea, is to elevate these sparks out. History, I cannot emphasize this idea enough. History is an upside-down hourglass. And it's like, an hourglass, like the top chamber has sand in it, right? And then there's a bottom chamber that's empty. So you turn it over. Well, when you turn it over, it's empty at first. But the moment you turn it over, the sand starts coming down. Now, you don't turn it over if you want to keep track of time. Today we have stopwatches and alarm clocks and all that. But in the old days, before they had that, they measured out how much sand falls for a certain home, for a certain chamber, and how long it takes to know how much is 2 minutes and how much is 1 hour. It's called an hourglass, right? So you've got this, this chamber filled with sand, and when the last grain of sand has dropped down from the upper chamber to the bottom chamber, the hour is over. Whatever you're cooking, take it off the fire. That's how long it takes. That's the idea of an hourglass. Creation is just the upside down reality of that. Instead of the contents of the upper chamber being in the upper chamber, in the lower chamber. And God said, now I'm going to make man, and the whole point of man is to get every last spark out of the lower chamber, which is the world that we live in, and really the spiritual, what's called the klipos, right? A lot of the sparks were taken out by God to make creation. A bunch were put back in when Adam ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil and undid paradise, and we got this world. The reason why this world does not look like paradise, no matter how wonderful the 5-star hotel looks like and how many jacuzzis they have and how much gourmet food they serve, whether it's a yacht, or what do you call it, cruise, it's like doesn't make a difference. We try hard to make it very much like paradise, but it's nothing. You just can't, for the very simple reason that the sparks are down here. This is what the world looks like, is what the Garden of Eden looks like when the sparks have been removed from it. Because to make the Garden of Eden, you have to take the sparks. The sparks are holy. They create their whole reality. So history is just about that. Mashiach come. When will Mashiach come? That's the question that anybody who believes in them has always asked. The Gemara, we ask, when will Mashiach come? The answer, you look at your watch, you can't figure it out, because there's nothing in your watch that you can see. It's in there, but you can't really see it to tell you. But if you understand that the whole point of history is to get every last spark out of the klipas, that triggers the whole process. Everything happens. It's like that last number in the combination lock, right? It's like 5 numbers, whatever, right? And you do the first 4, click, 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 and that's all you get. That's all you get. You do the last one, and all of a sudden this mechanism, and this moves, and that moves, and that moves, and that triggers that, and that triggers that. Like that's everything happens at that point in time. That last single little spark, that last little spark, that's just so teensy. It's invisible. And who will have the merit to take that one out? But the moment the last spark is taken out of the klipas, spiritual impurity, which is the reality of evil and corruption and leftism and whatever is not in consonance with God's will in the Torah. There's things in the right too that have to go everywhere. Whatever it is, you don't need to talk politics. Whatever is not consistent with God's master plan, His final idea for creation, that's got to go. And that will happen the moment that last single spark is taken out. And that's all we're doing here. That's all, the whole purpose of man. It's a big game show, just ongoing. So that the 10 martyrs had to die because sometimes, not somebody, but the whole way to bring out those sparks is primarily by doing mitzvahs, by doing the right thing. And the more mesiras nefesh, a person prays, like you come to shul, right? And, you say the words. It is already somewhat of a self-sacrifice to go to shul. There's lots of people who don't go to shul. They sleep it instead. You get up at 6:45 or 6:30 and you go to shul to be more or less on time for minyan when you'd rather be sleeping. That's already a self-sacrifice. But it's not the greatest self-sacrifice, but it is a self-sacrifice. You then put on your tefillin or whatever, your talis, and you stand there and you go through the entire davening. It's a self-sacrifice, without question. And then you have to daven Shemona Esrei, and now your mind is going someplace else, and it's hard to focus. And you realize to focus really requires at least 2 things. One is you have to really struggle to concentrate, and concentration is not an easy thing to do and to hold for 10, 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. But the average Shemona Esrei is probably 9 minutes or so, a good one, to 10 minutes. And the second thing is it takes energy, because I can speak for myself personally. If I don't put myself into it, if I don't try to arouse some type of energy force within me, I'll drift off. I'll lose the connection. I can go in and out from time to time, but I'll lose the connection. If somebody distracts me, I'll lose where I am. But if I'm really focused and putting energy into it, myself into it, then I can stay focused and I start to feel a connection to God I don't feel other times. But that energy that we put into the mitzvah, that's pulling out the sparks, and that's all there is. So the reason why the 10 martyrs had to die, no one was doing this. Not enough people were doing it. The Gemara says that the process of taking sparks out was so behind schedule and so so inadequate that, and this is the key point that the Rizal brings down, that normally, if we're on schedule, if we're doing things the way that God means for us to do it, okay, then it's enough to die in the mitzvahs, not physically, because every time you're self-sacrificing, every time you give yourself over, it's a partial death. I just saw today that I forget exactly where I saw it, but I saw it today where it says that sometimes a person, they really, from God's perspective, they deserve to die, but rather than kill them, they'll die in a more less permanent way by losing some money, or they might hurt themselves and bang themselves, and every time they bang themselves, it's kind of like a partial death a little bit, but it gives them a chance to continue and do tshuva and continue on. But sometimes the situation becomes so dire as it was in the time of the Romans, so then the average Mesiras Nefesh of the Jewish people, of a Jew, someone doing mitzvahs, is not enough. Not enough. And the system becomes so bogged down, and so to the point that creation almost gets to the point of tohu. Tohu is in the second verse of Maaseh Bereishis, so it says the land was null and void. Ha'aretz hayta tohu v'bohu, right? V'choshech al panei tehom, ruach elokim merchepes al panei hamayim. Tohu, the second verse right there, right? It really is the first verse, but the Zohar says we switch it around because unless you know Kabbalah, it's not going to make sense to you. But tohu is the default state of creation failing. It's the failure of creation, and we can't get to that stage. God won't let it. So he'll cut us some slack by giving us some time. And we had that. And this plays out in history. The 50s and 60s, that's God cutting us slack, giving us some time to wake up and to learn what history's about, so we can do the job and save ourselves all the consternation that we've been going through over the last 10, 15, 20 years. But all that's happening, all this bad, all this negativity, and the war of Gog and Magog will just be the top, the end of the whole story, just about the sparks, right? So what will creation look like when Mashiach finally comes and all the sparks out of the klippas? Well, the first thing we're told is the Yetzer Hara is dead, because there's no evil anymore. Evil will go. It almost happened in Mitzrayim. Remember that? We talked about this, why we left Egypt so quickly, because if we didn't leave Egypt when we did, then Egypt would have been destroyed, and that would have destroyed the Yetzer Hara and the Sitra Achra, and brought Mashiach then, but it wasn't the time yet, because we still hadn't gone to Mount Sinai to receive Torah, so free will had to still exist. So for free will to still exist, God had to keep evil alive. So therefore he took us out of Egypt, because the night that God revealed, he carried out the death of the firstborn, it was such a revelation of light that evil was messianic. The night of Makis Bacharis was messianic. It was that if we tasted the messianic era the night we made the first Seder, the Korban Pesach. But then it went back because it wasn't time yet, just a taste. So it went back to the regular. That's what I mean. God strengthened the heart and power and his servants, meant that God gave back some of the koyach to evil to balance out the good. Because we had to receive Torah still. There were still 4 exiles potentially to come up. But now we're at the end. Now we got the Torah. We went through history. We've done all 4 exiles. Imagine that. 3,300 and whatever years later, we've done it all. When we left Mitzrayim, we hadn't. And here we are at the end, all done. The problem back then doesn't exist for us. We can now afford for evil to die, for it to end off. And we're getting there. And the Gemara says that as long as the temple existed, especially Sukkot time, the Jewish people brought 70 sacrifices on behalf of the 70 nations. And that atoned for the 70 nations. But they didn't know that. They didn't realize that. So they destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. So Gemara says that they understood that that's what was going on in the Beis Hamikdash. Not only would they not have destroyed it, they would have put up a wall around it, put up sentries around it to protect it. The same thing is true today. If the left and the liberals and Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and the people in the governments who don't like us understood, by doing what they're doing to us, by putting the pressure on us, they're actually expediting their own demise. Now, some people are good. Probably most people are good. Their sparks that are their souls are still too much in the klipos. So as long as a person's soul is still mired in spiritual impurity, they're gonna do that bad stuff. And we all do. We all slip. David Melech, when he first came out, the whole story of Bathsheba, right? And everything else that went wrong in his life. You know why he was forgiven for all that? He didn't really actually do a chet in the end, because the Gemara discusses what happened with that. He didn't do what appears, but it didn't look good. Nassim says to him, you know, but you're a king of the Jewish people. Look at the world has done with the story of David and Melech and Bathsheba, but they, you know, how they turned the whole thing around. And Nassim says to him, you can't do things like that because that's Chilul Hashem. It doesn't, you know. So why was he forgiven? Not in his lifetime, by the way. The Gemara says only after he died. The Aron HaKodesh could not get into the Beis HaMikdash. Shlomo Melech, he built the Beis HaMikdash, was now taking the Aron HaKodesh to bring it into the Beis HaMikdash and put it in its proper place, and the doors wouldn't open up. So he tried all kinds of things to appeal to God to do it. Only when he mentioned David and Melech, in the schus of David and Melech, that the doors opened up. The Gemara says at that point, everybody knew that David was forgiven for what he did, and he's the ancestor of Mashiach. If he was guilty of what he did, would he be the ancestor of Mashiach? No way, no how. So then why was he forgiven for what he did do? Because it says, Kabbalah explains, his soul had just come out of the klipos. He was still affected by, so he was still bound to make mistakes. But the mistakes were his. It was a function of being so deep in the klipos. But once he was clearly out of it, by the time he died at the age of 70, he had no yitzhar anymore. He was completely free of it. He was a complete tzaddik. He'd worked himself the entire time. But his yetzer had died already because he killed it off by coming so close to a kosher bar. So, there are people who are doing stuff in the world today who might survive into Yemos HaMashiach, but once the last spark's out of the klipos and the tomb is gone, all of a sudden their soul will be revealed for what it really is, and they're going to, wow, amazing, and I'm so guilty for what I did. I feel so bad. I was so wrong. Thank you, God. It's like a person becomes Baal Tshuva. I've told this before many times, right? Somebody becomes Baal Tshuva, right? When they first becomes religious, you see it all the time. They act like, they're doing God a favor because they became religious and they learn a bit more, right? And then they realize it's actually a schus, a merit, that they were lucky enough in this world to realize the truth. And it's like now they're in partnership with God. And finally, the last stage, they've learned for a couple of years more. They feel so grateful that God didn't wipe them off the face of the earth, gave them a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance, and now they finally found Torah, and they're living according to the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, fulfilling themselves personally. That process is called leaving the klipos. The more that person takes that spark, because the secular world, with all of its activities, all of its godlessness, all of its anti-Torah values. Again, a lot of people don't know what they're doing. This is not an accusation. It's just a perception. It's an assessment of the society. But that's the klipos, right? And it gets very extreme, very extreme. You have red light districts in cities where the worst of worst goes on. You have mafias. You have all these terrible things that go on. You have corruption. That's just the klipos. It's just the klipos are not in any one particular physical location. But anywhere that behavior takes place that is anti-Torah, and the more extreme, the more this is so. You find the klipos. You find where they're living. They could be here, patches there. It could be the Kremlin, it could be over here, the White House, House of Commons. It could be all, downtown, this office more than this office. Wherever, just look. If you find that type of behavior that God does not, you found the klipos, and how to stay away from it. And that's because the sparks in there, people are still, but the moment that the last spark is out, whoa, just, so much so that it says that there are lots, it doesn't give a number, but many people will just die from the shock. They'll just wake up and realize, what happened. How off they were, how much they missed it, that they were unable to see what the truth is about to the end, and they'll just die of the shock. Other people will just be grateful to finally be redeemed and be freed of all of that. So, that's what we're going to see. We're just going to wake up one day and find out, after the dust is settled, everything's clear, we're going to look around, and whatever evil, wherever it was, will be gone. Every nation will lose people. Wherever evil became so embedded, so ingrained that it could not be rectified, the lesson brings down that level. It's not going to be fixed by what happens. On the contrary, it'll be eliminated. But for those for whom they were still that good, it was muddled, it was like in the swamp, so to speak, but it was recoverable through the truth. That will survive. And all of a sudden, we'll wake up one day, look at the world all around us, and we're going to see everybody without a Yetzer Hara. Can you imagine what that means? Because when that happens, all of a sudden there's no jealousy, there's no hatred. One of the reasons why there's no Achdus today, as much as we tried to bring about unity and the Jewish people first, and then it seems to go the other direction. It seems to get worse. The harder we try, the worse it gets. Like that frog, you keep hitting it just keeps splitting up the more frogs. Because of the Yetzer Hara. Democracy, because of the Yetzer Hara. All the good, the internet is a wonderful thing. Make no mistake about it. It is an incredible resource, phenomenal resource. But and the problem is there's evil people out there who abuse it. They figured it out, right? They use the technology. Technology is neutral, meant to be used for good, meant to be used to come closer to God. But somebody out there with the Yetzer Hara finds a way to somehow take advantage of people and destroy things in this world. But they're doing that to expedite the redemption, not because they choose it, because that's the way that God actualizes evil. Because the more that the evil is actualized, the more we're able to choose to reject it, and eventually those sparks come out, and the world will be on a whole different spiritual level, because it too will be freed. Creation itself will be elevated to a higher level. The same physical world. It's like the whole world will be on a lift, spiritual lift that will lift it up, and everything will feel different. It will smell different. Your senses will be different, and it'll be an experience that really I can't describe, but it will take care of all those things that anybody who's a truth seeker who wants to be connected to truth is bothered by in this world. That'll be gone, and then you have to deal with what to do with the situation then. But that's okay. Because once our own Yetzer Hara has been taken away, the Gemara talks about, in the Gemara, in the Medrash, and actually it seems like an argument amongst the Tanaim, will mitzvahs apply in the Messianic era? So according to one Gemara, it seems like no, that once Mashiach comes, mitzvahs are over. According to another, it seems like, mitzvahs will still apply. The Rambam, the Rishonim talk about this. The Rambam and many Rishonim hold mitzvahs will apply. They bring, of course, proofs for their position. They don't say it, they bring proofs for it. Others hold no. The Leshem, as he does so beautifully all the time, answers the question. He explains it, he puts it all together, and he says, we're both right. You're all right. Mitzvahs will still apply, but the reason why they won't apply is because you won't need them to be mitzvahs anymore. Because right now, as long as I have a Yetzer Hara that tells me to sleep in and not go to minyan, I need to have a mitzvah that says to go, that encourages me. I need to have something over my head that tells me there's a higher level of reality. And if I can't get to that level now, at least I need to be afraid of punishment, of missing out I'm going to have to answer for this. I mean, look, on Yom Kippur, we stand there praying to God because some people do it because they just love God. They're not worried about punishment. They're just worried about not having as close a relationship with God as they can. That's Eluzman, Niladodi V'dodi Li. That's where we are right now. That's their whole mahalach. That's their whole kivum in life. Let's face it. So many people are worried about punishment. I should have done that. Now if I don't fix it up, I don't get it. If I don't do tshuva, get kapora, God's going to come after me. This year, Gehenna, whatever. Let me say I'm sorry, and try to make amends and do things better next year. But the reality is that's what the situation today, as it exists right now. So I need to have mitzvahs. I need to have threats of punishment. I need to have reward and punishment. The luchos that Moshe came down with, the first set of tablets that he broke in the end because of the golden calf. The first set of tablets he came down with only 2 mitzvahs on it. And the Lohi Elohim Acheri. Only 2 mitzvahs. because it was the Torah of Yemos Mashiach. Moshe came down the mountain. They said, Nasef and Nishma, we will understand and we will do. And they were elevated to a level of Yemos, the Messianic era. Evil was gone from them. The air of Rav is still there. That's the problem. And they pull people in, and it's complicated. But it's part of history, part of God's master plan too. And we lost it. So then we got a second set of tablets. But you'll notice the first set of tablets God carved out and wrote on. The second set of tablets we carved out, Moshe carved out, and then God wrote on it. Sounds like a small difference, huge difference. That's the one with all the 613 mitzvahs on it. Because now we're living in a world with the Yetzer Hara. And with the Yetzer Hara, you have to have every mitzvah spelled out, the reward and the punishment, to encourage us to do the right thing, to give us that extra incentive to fight against the Yetzer Hara. But the moment it's taken away from us, the Yetzer Hara is gone from us, we will automatically do everything the Torah has said, because that's the Torah is not illogical. The Torah is the most logical way to live. It's the watchmaker telling you how to use the watch. He made man. And he's saying, right? He's saying that you are supposed to be like this. And the Torah will help you. But the Yetzer keeps going, no, we don't want to. It's too hard. I'm too tired. I just want to die. And whatever possible capacity I can do it. And so it's a mitzvah to inspire us to work harder. But once that's gone, that's the world we're going to find as Rosh Mashiach. That's just part 2. Okay.
Rabbi, thank you very much. I do have a question, though, and it probably may be a basic question, but what about people who aren't aware of our purpose to collect sparks of Kedusha? I mean, all of this is very Kabbalistic, and Hasidic teachings teach this, and I've been learning for years, and you've been teaching for years, and thank God for you and other of my teachers. I know this, but there are people out there that don't know this terminology. Not only that, but maybe they don't realize this is what they're there for. How do we educate them?
You're right. So, the Arizal brings down that there are, 3 levels of soul in the world. There's souls of Tamei Chachamim, there's souls of Balabatim, and souls of Amaretz, right? What does that mean? Amaretz usually is a very negative terminology, but it means basically you've got people who are brilliant. You see, you can't deny the fact that some people are more brilliant than others. It's just that's the way the world is. You have people who are very bright, but they're not. Their drive is not necessarily to be learning Torah all the time and teaching Torah. They maybe went to yeshiva, they learned a lot, but now they're in the business world, and they're balancing both worlds. Right? And then there are the people who they're not even interested in learning that much. They don't really have the smarts. But everyone's important to Hashem. Everyone was made by Hashem, and everyone's valuable to Hashem in the way that Hashem values them. It's not an evaluation we can make. His expectations. He knows who's who. He knows, so we don't know who's who. So I have to teach about sparks to everybody. And maybe we'll talk to this person, and maybe we'll talk to that person, but I won't talk to that person. But that's not my calculation. That's their calculation. That's God's calculation. So it's the same idea. Like you talk to a bunch of people to try to teach them about Torah, and one person gets it, the other don't. But I've done my job. I can't say he doesn't look smart enough. He doesn't look like he's got what it takes, or she doesn't have what it takes to. So I'm not going to talk to them. I'm not going to share. In my lifetime, I have been shocked by the people who became, Bali Tshuva, and surprised by some who didn't. It's just no way to know. So our responsibility is to share that information, make it available, right? Then it's up to the individual to decide what they, what talks to them, what doesn't talk to them, what they're prepared to do, and then it's up to God to decide whether they were right or wrong.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi. Everybody have a wonderful week. Rabbi, thank you for joining us. We'll probably be starting to talk about the Chagim of the holidays of Rosh Hashanah upcoming. And if you have any suggestions for topics, please contact me here on Facebook or on the Israel Torah website. And just please have it in your minds the families of the hostages that were taken this week. And as we've been going through a collective grief, but as the Rabbi always says, there's a reason for everything. It's all part of the Geula process, and we're trying to do what we can just to keep bringing it along. So keep listening to the Rabbi and start learning Torah, mitzvahs, and look at his website, and you can learn more about it. Have a wonderful Shabbat, everybody. Thank you for joining us.